There's a 1967 Bertram sitting in a Fort Lauderdale warehouse right now that sold for $12,000 in 2019. Last month, the same boat traded hands for $470,000. The owner didn't restore it, didn't repower it, barely touched it, and he's not the only one. Across marinas from Newport to San Diego, boats that dealers couldn't give away 5 years ago are now commanding prices that make no sense on paper. But here's what matters to you. If you own one of these 11 models, or you've been watching one gather dust at your local yard, the window you're sitting in right now might not stay open. Let's talk about what's actually happening in this market and why boats with zero curb appeal are suddenly worth more than brand new center consoles. The Bertram 31. Moppie ran from 1967 to 1980, and for 30 years after production stopped, nobody wanted them. They were heavy. They burned fuel. The cabin layout felt dated. Dealers in South Florida told me they'd sit on the hard for 18 months with asking prices under $20,000 and still no bites. Then, something shifted around 2018. According to Yacht World Archive data, the average asking price for a Moppie in fishable condition was $19,000 in 2017. By 2022, that same average hit $91,000, and remember, those are asking numbers, not confirmed sales, so there's always a spread. Today, clean examples with original power are listing between $120,000 and $200,000, and they're moving in under 60 days, while neglected or poorly maintained examples still sell far lower. What changed? Part of it's the hull. Dick Bertram and Ray Hunt designed a deep V that could handle offshore chop better than most modern builds. Charter captains started buying them again because they're nearly impossible to break. But the bigger reason is this. People got tired of replacing boats every 5 years. The Moppie became a known quantity in a market flooded with unknowns. Insurance companies started seeing fewer claims, at least on the well-kept boats, and lenders got comfortable writing loans on 40-year-old fiberglass, though approvals still depend heavily on surveys and engine hours. And suddenly, the old workhorse nobody wanted became the old workhorse everybody needed. Egg Harbor built the 33 Sedan from 1972 through 1979, and it spent decades as the boat you inherited from your uncle and didn't know what to do with. Too small for serious cruising, too slow for the go-fast crowd. Brokers in the Chesapeake used to joke that listing an Egg Harbor 33 was like listing a used minivan. But between 2020 and 2023, something unusual happened. Prices tripled. A 1976 model in Annapolis sold for $34,000 in early 2020. By late 2023, comparable boats were closing in the $100 to $130 range, according to sales records from Chesapeake dealers, mainly for boats that were well maintained. Rougher ones still lag behind. The hull isn't revolutionary. The power options were modest even when new. So why the jump? Liveaboard demand. When marinas from the Great Lakes to the Gulf started seeing waitlists stretch into years, buyers who couldn't find slips for 60-footers started looking at compact sedans that fit in 30-foot wells. The Egg Harbor 33 has standing headroom, a full galley, and enough beam to feel like a real boat inside. It also has something most modern 30-footers don't, actual wood joinery that doesn't look like it came from a camper. Dealers report that buyers in their 50s and 60s are specifically hunting these down as retirement platforms, and they're willing to pay restoration costs that exceed the boat's value from 3 years ago, though those restorations don't always translate dollar for dollar into resale. Hatteras produced the 53 motor yacht from 1977 to 1982, and for years it sat in the shadow of the more popular 58. The 53 was too big to trailer, too small to impress at the dock, and too old to finance easily. In 2016, you could find them listed for under $100,000 all day long. Some sat unsold for 2 years. By 2024, that picture changed completely. Clean examples are now trading between $350,000 and $600,000, with top-tier boats pushing 7 figures if they've had modern electronics and recent repowers, though 7-figure sales remain extremely rare exceptions. This one's harder to explain with a single factor. Part of it's the Hatteras name carrying weight with older buyers who remember when the brand meant something. Part of it's the fact that the 53 has enough interior volume to feel like a real yacht without the $50,000 annual maintenance bill of a true 60-footer. But the real story is in the financing. Around 2021, several marine lenders started approving loans on Hatteras hulls from the late 70s if the survey came back clean and the engines had reasonable hours. But many lenders still cap the age they'll finance, so approval isn't guaranteed. That opened the door for buyers who couldn't write a check but could handle a monthly note. Suddenly, a boat that only cash buyers touched became accessible to a much wider pool. Chris Craft built the Commander 31 in the late 60s and early 70s, mostly in wood, and conventional wisdom said wood boats were dead weight in the modern market. Maintenance is expensive, insurance is tricky, storage yards charge premiums. For decades, that logic held. You could pick up a Commander 31 for under $10,000 if you were willing to deal with the headaches. Then collectors started paying attention. By 2022, restored examples were selling for $150,000 to $250,000, and even project boats in rough shape were bringing $30,000 to $50,000 at auction, though the restoration quality makes or breaks the real value. The shift wasn't about nostalgia. It was about rarity. Production numbers for the Commander 31 were relatively low, and most of the hulls built didn't survive. The boats that made it to 2020 in solid condition became genuinely scarce. Add in a demographic of buyers in their 60s and 70s who grew up around wood boats and have the disposable income to maintain them, and you get a market that's willing to pay for authenticity. Dealers in Michigan and upstate New York report that these boats move faster than comparable fiberglass models in the same size range, but it's still a niche market, and prices can swing quickly depending on inventory. Tiara built the 300 Open from 1987 through the mid-90s, and it spent most of its life as a solid but unremarkable fishing platform. Not fast enough to compete with the go-fast crowd, not fancy enough to stand out at the yacht club. Prices stayed flat for years, hovering in the $40,000 to $60,000 range for decent examples. Then, the pandemic hit, and everything changed. By 2023, the same boats were trading for $120,000 to $180,000, and inventory dried up almost completely, with much of that spike tied to temporary pandemic-era demand. The Tiara 3100 benefited from perfect timing. Families who'd never owned boats before suddenly wanted them, but they didn't want the learning curve of a sportfish or the maintenance of a cruiser. The 3100 offered a sweet spot. Enough cockpit space to fish, enough cabin to sleep a family, and a brand name that insurance companies and lenders recognized. Dealers report that buyers in their 40s with young kids are the primary market, and they're treating these boats as 10-year platforms rather than short-term toys. That kind of buyer behavior supports higher prices and faster turnover, which keeps values climbing. Though boats with original engines or outdated electronics still sell well below peak numbers. Albin built the 36 Trawler in Taiwan through the 80s, and it never won any beauty contests. The styling was utilitarian. The construction was solid but unspectacular. For years, these boats sold in the $60,000 to $90,000 range, and they moved slowly. But starting around 2019, something shifted. Prices climbed steadily, and by 2024, clean examples were bringing $160,000 to $220,000, with some top-tier boats crossing $250,000, though boats with tired engines or deferred maintenance still sit at the old price points. The driver here is cruising couples. The Albin 36 has legitimate range, low fuel burn, and enough system simplicity that owners can handle most maintenance themselves. As cruising destinations in the Bahamas and the Caribbean got more expensive and crowded, buyers started looking for boats that could go the distance without the overhead of a 50-footer. The Albin fit that profile. Marinas in the Great Loop Circuit report seeing more of them every year, and the boats hold up well enough that buyers feel comfortable taking them offshore, but only when properly refit and surveyed. That combination of capability and affordability created demand where none existed before. Grand Banks built the 36 Classic for decades, and the wood-hulled versions were supposed to be obsolete by now. Fiberglass is easier, maintenance is cheaper, resale is simpler. For years, that logic kept prices on wood. Grand Banks depressed, with decent boats available in the $80,000 to $120,000 range. But over the past 5 years, buyers stopped caring about the conventional wisdom. Wood 36 Classics in good condition are now selling for $200,000 to $300,000, and the nicest examples are pushing $400,000. but only if they have been meticulously maintained, because wood neglect kills value instantly. This market is driven by a specific buyer, someone in their late 50s or older who wants a boat that feels like a boat, not a floating RV. The wood Grand Banks has a presence at the dock that fiberglass can't replicate, and buyers in that demographic are willing to pay for it. Surveyors report that well-maintained wood hulls are holding up better than expected, which has eased some of the insurance concerns that used to kill deals, though insurance availability still varies heavily by region. The result is a market that's surprisingly robust for a boat type that was supposed to disappear. Pace built the 36 Sportfish in the late 70s and early 80s, primarily for the Chesapeake market, and for years it stayed regional. You'd see them around Annapolis and the Outer Banks, but they didn't have much name recognition outside the Mid-Atlantic. Prices reflected that limited appeal, with most boats selling in the $40,000 to $70,000 range. Then buyers from Florida and the Gulf Coast started noticing them. By 2023, the average sale price had jumped to $130,000, and the nicest examples were bringing over $200,000, though the market is still thin, and a few high sales can skew perception. The Pace 36 has a Carolina-style hull that handles inlet chop better than most boats its size, and it's built heavy enough that it doesn't beat you up in a sea. Tournament fishermen started buying them as low-cost alternatives to custom Carolina boats that were pushing $1 million. That demand pulled prices up across the board, even for boats that needed work. Dealers report that the Pace market is still regional, but the region's expanded from 3 states to 10, and the geographic spread is keeping values firm as long as inventory stays tight. Mainship built the 390 trawler in the late 80s and early 90s, and it was always a little awkward. Too big for most first-time buyers, too slow for people who wanted to get places, not quite pretty enough to be a yacht. Prices stayed stuck in the $100 to $150 range for years, and turnover was slow. But starting in 2021, the market shifted. By 2024, clean 390s were selling for $250 to $350, and inventory was tight, though boats with original systems or heavy hours still sit for a long time. The Mainship 390 became a live-aboard solution. The interior has more space than most 40-footers, with a proper master stateroom and a layout that actually works for full-time living. As housing costs climbed and marina live-aboard slips stayed relatively affordable, buyers started seeing boats like the 390 as legitimate housing alternatives. The demographic skews older, mostly retirees or near retirees, and they're looking for boats they can keep for 10 to 15 years. But the economics only work when maintenance is managed well. That's a very different buyer than the typical recreational boater, and it's created a market that didn't exist 5 years ago. Post built the 46 Sportfish as a semi-custom platform in the 70s, and it spent decades as a niche boat for serious fishermen who wanted something tougher than a Hatteras but didn't want to go full custom. Prices bounced around in the $150 to $250 range for years, depending on condition and power. But by 2023, the floor had moved up to $300,000, and the best examples were trading above $600,000, though only boats with major refits reached that upper tier. This one's all about scarcity and capability. Post didn't build many 46, and most of the hulls that survive are still fishing. The boats that come to market are typically well-maintained, which commands a premium. Add in a hull design that's still competitive with modern sportfish boats, and you get a market where buyers are willing to pay for proven performance. Dealers in Florida and the Carolinas report that the Post 46 moves faster than comparable Hatterases in the same price range, but the pool of buyers is still relatively small. Island Gypsy built the 36 Europa in the 70s and 80s, mostly in Hong Kong, and it never had a big following in the US. The boats were solid but generic, and they blended into the background at most marinas. Prices stayed flat for decades, with most boats selling between $50,000 and $80,000. Then, long-range cruisers discovered them. By 2024, the market had shifted completely, with clean examples bringing $140,000 to $200,000, and some fully equipped cruising boats pushing $250,000, as long as they have updated systems and documented maintenance. The Europa has a sea-kindly hull and enough tankage to make serious offshore passages without constant fuel stops. Cruising couples started buying them as budget-friendly alternatives to Nordhavens and other dedicated passage makers, and word spread through the cruising community. The boats hold up well in blue water, and parts availability is better than expected for a 40-year-old import, though sourcing certain hardware can still be a challenge. That combination created a niche market that's small but passionate, and prices reflect the intensity of the demand. So here's the question. If you're looking at one of these 11 boats right now, are you watching a peak or catching the middle of a climb? According to NMMA data, used boat sales velocity is still tracking above pre-pandemic levels, but inventory is starting to build in certain categories. That suggests we're in a transition period, and boats that spiked based purely on scarcity might start to soften, especially the ones with thin buyer pools. But the models on this list aren't moving because of panic buying. They're moving because specific buyer demographics found specific solutions, and those demographics aren't going away. If you're thinking about making a move, the next 90 days matter. Values don't climb forever, but they don't crash overnight either. If this kind of market analysis helps you make better decisions, subscribe. We track dealer data, lender trends, and insurance shifts every week, and we'll keep you ahead of the next move.